Hello and welcome. In this episode, we're going to talk about forensics and instructional design. How do you look at something that's already been created and given to you to figure out why it didn't work before or how it could work better? So when you talk about forensics, generally we think about CSI or something we see on television, but forensics is a real deal. And I'm very happy to have finally dug into it a bit. And Denise and I are going to bounce this around because she has some recent experience with these kind of things. And when you think about this, think about it and frame it with the idea that this is larger than just this specific case that we're going to talk about. It's more than train the trainer. It's any course that has been created before, even if you created it, that you need to look back and see, okay, what went well, what didn't go well, what from a design perspective can we do a little bit better? And sometimes these things are easy to figure out. Sometimes these things are very complicated. But think of it in terms of forensics. So going back and looking at what exists, how it can be made a little better. And if not, what do you really got to work with? So all instructional designers, learning designers need to be comfortable with this idea of forensics.
Yeah, and I have had experience with this very recently with a corporation that I did some training. I facilitated a train the trainer program, and they asked for my feedback. And with that feedback, they asked me to then redesign the entire train the trainer program for this particular level, which was a level 2. So these folks have been through train the trainer level 1. Now they're going into level 2. And some of the things that when I facilitated, some of the facilitation notes, things of that sort were really kind of clunky and kind of dense. And it felt, as a facilitator, inauthentic for me because it didn't leave room for my experience in certain things. And it really, some of the training went off the rails in that it didn't work.
Well, that's definitely off the rails.
Not the whole thing, but pieces of it went off the rails in that most of the students, let's say the majority, maybe had great experience in this, or they had already gone through it in the level 1 and this was a refresh, but it was presented in such a way that it was going to take an entire day of the lesson to reteach it again. Yeah. So there were some things that the organization knew were clunky that needed some fresh eyes on. And so that's something that I was tasked with to look at and sort of forensically look at, dig deep and see, okay, what is working, what is not, how can we make this better? How can we make this better for a facilitator who comes in with maybe not experience with the organization necessarily? That was my case when I first came in and trained. I was not really, I would say it was a first time training with this organization. So I had to really do my homework and dig deep. What I can say that worked, something that really, really worked that it was a big lesson for me, was the instructor guide really had a wonderful, the folks that put this together are really talented. So I just want to say that I think the new thing for them was somebody new coming into the organization and teaching it for the first time. That's what I think they really wanted me to look at as well, as someone in that case. And so for me, their instructor guide really helped to orient me to the organization as a whole. So that did help a lot. However, it really depends. We want to make sure that the facilitators are actually reading these instructor guides and absorbing that and digging deep into the information, because otherwise it can fall flat.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things forensically. First, most of the time we don't do forensics as a facilitator of a course. So you had trial by fire, or however you want to look at it. So this notion of, you can look at it and redo it and do all these other things, but until you actually teach it in front of this population with this content, no matter where it's sequenced in their knowledge, if they've already had all of this, why are we doing it again? If you're just adding on, does it take 8 hours? Is this a 1 hour refresher? Can you do it offline? Can you just send out notes? So there's lots of things forensically. And once again, as we talked in other videos that we've done about, you're not always the best person to facilitate something if you design it. So you had double jeopardy. You had this notion of first time teaching with this organization, this population, and its content, and also trying to design something that will work in an environment. So, from a forensic standpoint, I would stand back and say, okay, why did the organization think this wasn't working as well as it could? What feedback were they getting? Were they doing level ones and finding out people just thought it was a waste of their time? Were they doing level twos and people weren't reaching mastery, or they reached it very quickly with no problem? Also, is the population motivated to be there? Is this something that's required, or do they really want to do it? And if you got to sit through 8 hours and it's required, you got an attitude issue from the very beginning. Whether it displays itself with the folks bringing to the service or not, it's sitting on everybody's shoulder. And that's the thing we often find in forensics is people didn't even want to be there to begin with, or certainly thought there were better things to do with their time. So in certifications and required trainings and HR dictated and attorney dictated things, it's a whole different level of forensics because now you have to overcome this whole bias that beginnings are there. The beginnings are, okay, yeah, I don't care about the content. I don't care about the rest of this. So forensically, you got 2, 3, 4 things that you had to deal with. And I would ask you, looking back, do you think that facilitating this for the first time was the best thing in terms of your forensic analysis?
Right. Well, and it's so interesting you ask that because actually the folks there thought it was a great idea. Oh, you've been through this. Now you can see the pitfalls. You can feel what we're feeling. You can gauge from the learners what they seem to be experiencing or not experiencing. And so from that lens, I can say that I actually feel like it could be helpful. Now, if I were asked to just redesign a train the trainer program without having that experience with that train the trainer program, I think that would be really challenging because I wouldn't know where the issues were. However, I do understand that forensic engineering of a course, re-engineering of a course, does require that really important component of the analysis phase. Why is this not working? What do you think as an organization is not working? So being able to dig into that, looking at past level 1 evaluation, smile sheets, if you will. What are people thinking about the setup as a whole? Then maybe looking at the level 2s and seeing like where the gaps are, what content was delivered and why are they not getting this content? Is it that there's no performance agreement or very little performance agreement? There's so many different aspects that if you are not the person facilitating it, that you haven't facilitated it before, that's the kind of homework you need to do. But if even still though, as somebody who facilitated it, that's still homework that I need to do. I still need to look at all the elements that are involved in this and say, what went wrong? What went right?
Yeah, and I think that's where you start with forensics every time. The first place I go is objectives. Show me your objectives. What did you want them to accomplish? And honestly, half the time they don't have objectives. Well, we want them to learn and understand. Okay, well, just shoot me. Okay. I mean, if that's the level of objectives in the course, don't even bother. It's not going to be effective or efficient. Certainly not going to be designed professionally. So if they can't show objectives that are real objectives, then you have no evaluation task. And if you start to look at level 1s, assuming they did level 1, then you're going to find some information, but how accurate is it? Because that's a reaction. If they didn't want to be there, it wouldn't matter how good it was. If they thought it was a waste of their time, et cetera. So forensics, number 1, objectives. Number 2, evaluations. And the third thing you want to look at it, what already exists out there that's similar to this? So if I look at this, what do I have in terms of a level of comparison for what I'm accomplishing and what I'm trying to accomplish, what the organization wants? And fourth, I would look organization-wide. Okay, what is their ability to train and offer these courses? Do they have good facilitation? Do they have good content? Are the courses designed professionally? And all these things, when you put them in a box like this, many times they just don't line up. And I think that's what you found is even with very experienced designers, they were either institutionally required to do things a certain way, which many times you are. The institution expects certain things regardless of how well they work in the real world and how well it plays with instructional design at professional level. So I think that's where I usually start is those four things. And if I can answer those questions or get that data, then I got a pretty good chance of at least making recommendations on what we can change. And you'll get institutional resistance because that's not the way we've done it in the past. And we've got great teachers and all the stuff you hear, which all may be true, but it doesn't mean this course worked. It doesn't mean this program's working. I got bad news for you. One success is not 10 successes. And you just really need to do that. So I really think forensics in this case, especially with you standing right in front of this class and teaching this course, wow.
One of the things the other thing that I didn't say into this equation is that the organization itself too, they were confused about what the outcome should be. What are we trying to get these learners to do in terms of, do we want we want them to walk away with a project that is maybe completely done, right? Or do we want them to walk away with theoretical knowledge? Or do we want them to walk away with the sense that they went through a workshop, so to speak? So that actually needs to be also ironed out in this analysis phase, right? What do you want for your learners? And that was not agreed upon. That it was sort of like, well, we're not really sure.
It seldom is. So in a design plan, when you start to write up a rationale, and one of the things you have to have as an element in a rationale is what's the organizational goal? What do they want to accomplish? What is their outlook on this? What are their expectations? And there are many times when organizations simply want to make people happy. They want to present themselves as being professional and the go-to place for this information and this or that. And the actual quality of the course and what they walk away with is secondary. I hate to say it, but sometimes it is. The other thing you have to think about is most of the stuff we do with adults outside of academia, if it's theoretical, you're wasting their time. You can set a base of theory, but that should take 1% of your time. Okay, just so everybody knows, this is based in fact and science and in studies and all these other things, and this is why we're going to do it this way. But as soon as you start to talk theory and all the rest of this with busy adults, they start to glass over. They're just not going to be engaged in it. And that's from years of experience with this. So if an organization wants to try to establish their own foundational, gee, we know what we're doing, kind of an attitude about it, and they think that theory does that, you're not going to impress anybody. Adults are not easily impressed, if ever impressed. So if you have 8 hours with them, spend 8 hours teaching them something.
Yeah.
Know what that thing is because of your objectives and evaluate it with level 2s. And off you go. And, institutional stuff is tough.
It is. What I will say, really, to commend this organization is that what I love about them is that they see it for themselves. They see they want improvement, and they're willing to go through the steps, as painful as they may be, to uncover what would make this more successful, because they really have put together a phenomenal training program, train the trainer program, train level 1, train level 2. They want to put a level 3 out there. And I commend them for this because they really are pioneers in their industry doing this. And so I just actually can't wait to roll up my sleeves and help be a part of it and help work with them to get them to where they want to be with their learners.
So I think the takeaways, as we're talking about this first entry into this notion of forensics in learning design and instructional design, is check the basics. 4 things you have to look at. You have to look at objectives. You have to look at evaluations. You have to look at what the institution wants. You have to look at the history of where they've been with these things. So start your forensic there. Look and see what's possible for you in terms of what leeway do you have to change things and what are your suggestions going to be. And the other thing I would say to you as designers is don't be afraid to voice an opinion about design. And this is one thing I always do. I always reduce it to writing. It's either in a memo or in some other form that is stationary and has a history. Because I don't want to come back later and have to explain to someone why something didn't work when you didn't follow what I recommended. And there have been times when I refused to do work because they just wouldn't do the things that need to be done. And I was not going to be held responsible for failures. So make sure you document all of these things. Make sure you do your analytics. Make sure you really know what you're talking about. Don't be afraid to ask tough questions. Forensics is not an easy thing to do. And it's not comfortable for some of us because it really can be invasive for organizations. They sometimes don't want you to have all this information or to be asking these questions. But if they come to you with a failure or something that's not working as well as it should or something that needs to be there, it isn't, then they need to listen to professionals. And hopefully that will be us.
Can't think of a better way to close this out, actually, is that statement that you just made. Absolutely. If you have thoughts on this, please put them in the comments. If you want to see further information on this, you have other insights that you think you'd really like to learn about when it comes to forensics and analysis, instructional design, please let us know. We are here for you. That's what we're here for, building community. We are, learning, adapting along with all of you. So thank you so much for tuning in, and be sure to hit that subscribe button. Thanks.